just resumed recording. And just as a little, not a caveat, but an announcement before we jump in. If you have a thought or a question that comes up, this is, you're more than encouraged to participate. I hope this is, informational, but also a discussion. So, the title of this sort of study, this angle of looking at the Book of Esther, is themes of joy, resilience, and giving, which is sort of the theme of the North Shore programming through these couple weeks around Purim. And I thought it'd be fun to pull out those themes from the Book of Esther and the story of Esther. In order to do that, we are going to cover two sort of background pieces of information on the Book of Esther. And then we'll fit those themes in of joy, resilience, and giving in the text itself, and hopefully apply those to our observance and celebration of Purim itself. So I'm going to share my screen. So you can see the texts that I'm talking about. So I'm going to share this, and then I'm going to make it in present mode, so it's nice and big. Let's present. Present. No?
It'd be under slideshow.
Under slide?
On the top.
Oh, here.
Yep.
There we go. Thanks, Deborah.
You're welcome.
Great. Okay. So joy, resilience, and giving in the Book of Esther. The first piece of background information, you maybe have encountered this before when studying the Book of Esther, is that God is not mentioned at all throughout the 10 chapters, 9 chapters of the Book of Esther. So the rabbis of the Talmud make this connection in, so this BT is Babylonian Talmud in the tractate Hulin. Would anyone like to read this excerpt of Talmud?
Okay, I will.
Thanks, Enid.
Okay. I'm not sure I can see the end of the sentences because the pictures of the people are there. So if somebody wants to fill in. Okay. They all asked Rav Matana, from where in the Torah can one find an allusion to the, I don't see the words.
To the events.
Okay, involving Esther. He replied to them that the verse states, then my anger shall be
kindled against.
Okay. Them on that, kindled again, I guess, against them on that on my maybe somebody else needs to read this.
Sure, I'll pick it back up. So this verse states, then.
Okay.
Oh, thanks, Leslie. Thanks,
Okay.
Leslie.
Then, and the verse states, then my anger shall be kindled against them on that day, and I will forsake them, and I will hide, haster astir, my face from them, and they shall be devoured, and many evils and troubles shall come upon them, so that they will say in that day, have not these evils come upon us because our God is not amongst us? And I will hide my face on that day for all the evil which they shall have wrought, in that they are turned to other gods.
Thank you, Leslie and Enid, and welcome, Cecile and Bob. Just mentioned we're studying the themes of the Book of Esther, and in order to do that, we are looking at a couple pieces of background information. So this first one is that the name of God does not appear in the scroll of Esther, and this is an excerpt of Talmud that Leslie and Enid read that makes this connection a little bit. This the rabbis of the Talmud connecting this verse from Deuteronomy where God says, I will hide my face. Haster et astir. That's the word is sort of doubled for emphasis. The rabbis connect this verse from the book of Deuteronomy. They say that is an allusion to the book of Esther because God hides the face from people in the book of Esther because God does not appear anywhere explicitly. Any response or question to this connection here? Yeah, Leslie.
So
And you're on mute. Okay, there we go.
I got it. So my question is this: generally, when we describe God or we are alluding to God, we use capital G for God, him, or however, it's usually him, but with a capital H. Here it's my face, and it's not near the bottom in that last line. It's my face, capital M, my anger near the top. So who's the speaker?
This is, well, from the book of Deuteronomy. This is Moses repeating God's words. So
Okay,
this excerpt is from God's perspective,
okay.
with Moses as the communicator. Yeah, Enid.
Maybe the lesson has to do with all this evil that's going on, and God doesn't want to show his face or be present in the evil. So he stands away, doesn't want to participate.
That's part of this excerpt from Deuteronomy. Absolutely. And you could apply that to the book of Esther. There's, a lot of ill in the world in that context. And you're also putting together, in our context, it is a difficult time to be a Jewish person, to be a person in the world with war raging in Israel and Gaza and anti-Semitism and so on and so on. The list goes on. It can sometimes feel like God is hiding God's face, haster astir, which also they're making this connection, haster, the word haster, to conceal or to hide, same root letters in Hebrew as the name Esther. So they also make this, the rabbis of the Talmud try to further illustrate this point that God does not explicitly appear in the scroll of Esther. And part of that connection is even the letters of I will hide or conceal make up the letters of Esther's own name. Yeah, Enid.
So to go backwards, God hides his face, that whole burning bush incident. So is that just a whole separate thing, or is it somehow connected? And which came first? The bush or I thought the bush.
The burning bush came first
Right.
in the order of the Torah. For example, Rashi, the medieval commentator, would say there is no chronology to the Torah, but burning bush is Exodus chapter 3. God first says, I will hide my face, way later, Exodus 20 something. So, and there's a theme of being face to face with God or not. The psalmist often writes, do not hide your face from me. In the priestly blessing, the lines of the priestly blessing are, Ya'er Adonai panav elecha, Yisa Adonai panav elecha, like turn your face toward me. So this is very much a theme in Jewish tradition. And one in the book of Esther is that God is not explicitly mentioned. Of course, one could make the case God appears in relationships or in courage or in, joy, resilience, and giving, so on and so on. I'm not, gonna refute or contend that, but God's name does not appear in the book of Exodus. So that's what these rabbis are picking up on. In the book of Esther, God is haster, is concealed. So that's our first piece of background information. And And that kind of gives us some framing that the Book of Esther is, not going to call it humanist, but it's human-centered. It's much more about human courage, the human capacity to create a miracle rather than a sort of a divine interventionist miracle, which shows up in other parts of our tradition. I guess like one immediate example is the splitting of the Red Sea. There's no splitting of the Red Sea equivalent in the Book of Esther. The heroism is Esther approaching the king and Esther's courage. So that's piece number one for us. Are we ready to move on to the second of two pieces of background information? Great. So first one, God's name does not appear in the Book of Esther. Second one is, this is, okay, and then I'm going to ask someone to pick it up right here at the bolded, all of these books. So this comes from Adele Berlin, who writes a commentary on the Book of Esther. And she writes that Esther is a story about Jews living in diaspora, and that it resembles several other books from the late biblical and early post-biblical period. That's roughly 400 or 500 BCE to 200-300 BCE. And Adele Berlin makes three connections. The Book of Daniel is very similar to the Book of Esther. The Book of Judith, which is not in the Hebrew Bible, but it's considered apocrypha literature, which are like some books from around that time that didn't make the Hebrew canon. So she writes the Book of Daniel, the Book of Judith, and the Book of Tobit, another one of these almost made it to the Hebrew Bible books. That those three books are all around the same time. They all take place in diaspora. That means outside of the land of Israel. And they all have this connection to the Book of Esther as taking place in diaspora. And would someone pick it up at all of these books in the bold sort of, thank you, Amy.
All of these books are entertaining fictional narratives that present models of successful behavior for Jews living in diaspora. They are designed to promote pride in Jewish identity and solidarity within the Jewish society and where it fell to the individual Jew, not the state, to ensure Jewish continuity.
Thank you. And would someone read the last excerpt, starting with all the stories
Okay.
through the end? Thank you, Deborah.
All the stories except Esther stress Jewish piety and commitment to Jewish values and rituals. The secular nature of Esther, its lack of God's name, prayer, kashrut, traditional modesty, and
Endogamous, that's just like for Jews only marrying Jews, or people of a culture group only marrying inside that group.
endogamous marriage sets it apart from the other Jewish diaspora stories and from other books of the Bible as well. But in general tone and content, Esther is properly classified among the diaspora stories that circulated in the Persian and Hellenistic periods.
Thank you. So this is a very academic perspective. Could anyone, well, I guess, two questions. What's the case that Adele Berlin is making here about the Book of Esther? That's my first question. And second question, does this resonate with your understanding of the Book of Esther or Purim kind of coming into right now? And I think we have someone else who's Ron and Phyllis Chess. Welcome. And I saw a hand somewhere. Okay, let's go Enid and then Cecile.
Well, I think that it reinforces the secular responsibilities of our people and our work, our responsibility. I kind of lost my track. What was the question?
first question was, what's the case that Adele Berlin is making here? So you answered that.
It speaks of the responsibilities as a Jew, regardless of what the whole God thing is all about. You still are responsible. Okay. That the second question, I'm not sure.
That's okay. Yeah, Cecile.
Okay, well, it looks to me what she's talking about is that in this situation, the Jews were a minority in the society, and it was up to the Jews to ensure their Jewish community. But the secular nature of Esther, its lack of God's name, prayer, kashrut, and traditional modesty and indigenous marriage sets it apart from other Jewish diaspora stories and from other books of the Bible as well. So is what she is saying that at that time that the Jews were not following all these traditions?
Not necessarily. I mean, she could be. My understanding is she is kind of like referring back to the first slide of the Book of Esther has these connections with other stories that take place outside of the land of Israel in our tradition. But it even has these differences with those because it is so human-centered, as Enid mentioned. And so much about personal responsibility, not necessarily within the sort of God and law tradition that's been developed. Yeah, Deborah.
So the couple of things that struck me is that this paragraph puts the story of Esther in a time and a place. And in the time of the Persian periods and in the place that we have come to know it to being in. So that part of it resonated with me as how I've learned it. But she also stresses that it's fiction. And I grew up learning that this was a true story about the Jewish people and what we could learn about it from. So just another perspective, but that's how I grew up, that it was not fiction. So
yeah, those are two big points to what she's saying. Yeah, first placing it in its historical context, especially because this is one of the last books of the Hebrew Bible. And scholars are able to tell that through the type of Hebrew and certain vocabulary words that are used. I don't know if anyone's ever seen, I think it's on Google, they'll chart how frequently a word is used over time. So like a slang word, or like awesome, the word awesome it'd be very low for most of history, and then in the 1990s it would spike. So that's part
awesome.
of how they, yeah, so that's part of how scholars date these works in our traditions. That's definitely one piece, is the historical context. And about its being fiction, this is even apart from the discussion about whether the Torah, whether the Hebrew Bible is 100% true, or it's our spiritual inherited, mythical narrative. This is apart from that conversation. The Book of Esther, you can pick up and identify some pieces of satire and humor, and that it also sets it apart as almost like more intentionally fictional, because of some of the humor and unbelievable aspects of it. Yes, Enid.
So from a more mystical point of view, one might think that possibly this whole removal of God and all the spirituality that hangs on to that whole frame of reference is necessary for the accountability and for the work of all these people in their everyday life. I don't know, I guess that, I think a mystic would say that.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, this is, I mean, one reason I love the Book of Esther is it doesn't hinge on the intervention of God, which I find very interesting. I also have come to recognize there are varying levels of belief and non-belief in God and understandings of what God is. And Esther kind of is like outside of that whole conversation. And there's still, as you mentioned, Enid, a lot to learn about being a person, being a Jew, being, you know, standing up for what's right, being involved in community that is from this human-centered approach. I saw Leslie had a hand.
Yeah, my kind of taking in everything that everybody has said, but I'm also kind of thinking about they're talking about the diaspora. And so if one leaves their Jewish community where everybody, I'm exaggerating, but everybody is Jewish, but in that time you live in a community where people are the same, and you're now spreading out in the diaspora. And you know, what are the things, both tangible and intangible, that you take with you? And you know, this is Book of Esther is a story of Jews being in the minority, and how did they have to be resilient? What did they take with them, hold inside them? How did they keep their Jewishness? Maybe not flaunt it if they were in a community that was not Jewish. How do you blend, how do you assimilate and yet hold on to the values, the rituals that are you know, are from our being, are in our blood, in our, you know, our DNA. And so I'm wondering if this whole idea of God holding back and saying, I've given you everything that you need. I've packed your suitcase. It is now up to you to not only carry your suitcase into the diaspora, but now unpack it and what that looks like. And so that's kind of how I see that.
I love that. 100%. I mean, this is, yeah, you're picking up a lot on what it means to be a Jewish community in diaspora. It's a big, you know, setting in this book, and also gets at these, you know, I wanted to cover these two pieces of background information. One, that, you know, God isn't explicitly mentioned, and the other is that this is a diaspora story, because, at least for me, much of the Jewish tradition, Jewish calendar, either originated or centers around Israel. For example, Passover next month. And I don't have to go through every holiday, but many of the holidays. And this captures a diaspora experience. So we are all, on this call at least, part of the Jewish diaspora. I don't want to speak for everyone. I feel, for me, I still have a connection to Israel. When there's such intensity going on in Israel right now, and I feel a pull and I feel a draw and I feel a connection there, what does it mean for me to be participating in Jewish community in the diaspora? And the Book of Esther that's the setting. It takes place in diaspora, and it gives us, Leslie, as you mentioned, you know, what Jewish behaviors, what tools, what rituals do we take from our traditional experience that does center in and around Israel into the diaspora with us. And there are many. Three that I, you know, sort of as a synagogue, we wanted to focus on were joy, resilience, and giving as three very much Jewish behaviors and themes that we get from this human-centered story in the Jewish diaspora. So that's our context. That's our background that we're coming into the Book of Esther with. Yes. So we're going to start with joy. And I'm going to change the slide here. Oh, is this what I wanted? Yes, it is. So this is towards the end of the Book of Esther, chapter 8. So this is kind of right when it resolves. And I italicized the beginning. I bolded the end. I italicized to try to illustrate. This is an excerpt that hints at some humor and satire, which to me is part of a joyful Jewish experience. And I bolded a section at the end where it's much more explicit that joy is an element in the remembering the story of Esther. So would anyone like to read this excerpt, Esther chapter 8, verses 9 to 17? Thanks, Leslie.
I'll do it. So the king's scribes were summoned at that time on the 23rd day of the third month, that is, the month of Sivan. And letters were written at Mordecai's dictation to the Jews and to the satraps, the governors and the officials of the 127 provinces from India to Nubia, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language, and to the Jews in their own script and language. He had them written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet. Letters were dispatched by mounted couriers, riding steeds used in the king's service, bred of the royal stud, to this effect: the king has permitted the Jews of every city to assemble and fight for their lives. If any people or province attacks them, they may destroy, massacre, and exterminate its armed force together with women and children, and plunder their possessions on a single day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely on the 13th day of the 12th month, that is, the month of Adar. The text of the document was to be issued as a law in every single province. It was to be publicly displayed to all the peoples, so that the Jews should be ready for that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers, mounted on royal steeds, went out in urgent haste at the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed in the fortress Shushan. Mordecai left the king's presence in royal robes of blue and white, with a magnificent crown of gold and a mantle of fine linen and purple wool. And the city of Shushan rang with joyous cries. The Jews enjoyed light and gladness, happiness and honor. And in every province and in every city, when the king's command and decree arrived, there was a gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many of the people of the land professed to be Jews, for the fear of the Jews had fallen upon them.
Thank you, Leslie. And so what sticks out to us from this excerpt? And just again, as some context, this is like essentially as soon as the Jews are saved, this is the next, sort of how that's carried out. Enid.
Well, the first thing that stands out is this whole argument we have today in 2024 about how terrible this is, that everybody is getting slaughtered along the way in Israel with the Gaza situation, including me, who wonders if this is the right thing, depending on the hour of the day. And here it's the command. And I don't know, I would have never reacted to it the same way if this history hadn't been going along the way it is. And then at the end, I think we saw it in Israel, and I think it's just a sociological phenomenon. When a group of people have a common enemy, they unite, they have something bigger than themselves to fight against. So for the fear of many of the people of the land professed to be Jews, for the fear of the Jews had fallen upon them. When there's an emergency or there's something that's bigger and takes us out of our daily whatever, then there can become more of a connection to each other. I can't believe that. I mean, that's just, wow.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. This is, I think, especially this year, going to jump out at a lot more people. It's not a super studied part of the Book of Esther because it's uncomfortable within its context of being a diaspora story, and one that uses exaggeration, hyperbole. In its context, this is almost like another theme of the Book of Esther is that it's flipped. Nafohu is that our expectations are flipped. So the Jews in this Persian period are a powerless people. And this is, their literature that presents, in the end, guess what? The Jews are extremely powerful. And that's in the Esther context. You bringing it to our context leads to big questions about how Jews use power now that there is a Jewish nation state, engaged in war, in conflict, how people define that, and is very much a part of the conversation, especially since it comes up in the Book of Esther and is so often skipped over because it's very uncomfortable to sit with. The Jews were saved and then they carried out all these attacks. Yeah, Leslie.
Okay, I have a question here, and maybe I'm just reading this wrong, but I'm reading the dates of when the king's scribes were summoned, and I think that if a document adds any little piece that's a clue because it's important in some regard. So the king's scribe are on, and I don't know my Hebrew months, but on one particular day. And now the king has permitted the Jews of every city to assemble and fight for their lives, but he's giving them a single day. It says in the middle here, they may destroy, massacre, exterminate its armed forces, together women, children, plunder, on a single day in all the provinces on this particular, the 13th. So is that really, everybody's gonna hate the Jews and wreak havoc on the Jews on every other day, but on this single day, the king is giving permission to the Jews to fight back, but only on one day, so you better get your job done. Am I reading that
wrong? It's a good question. I'm not sure. That could be within the part about the 13th day of Adar might be more connected to just like that's when this was
what Purim is
decreed.
Yeah, okay.
So it might be more of the day of the decree rather than the day that Jews are allowed to defend themselves. But you did pick up in that this is it's not unprovoked. There is this, if any people or province attacks them, which that's not to provide any, opinion or commentary, but that is, again, like very resonant with our moment now.
Okay. I mean, because it just says that the document should be displayed so that the Jews should be ready for that day to avenge themselves on their enemy. So from that day forward or only on that day?
My guess is that day forward.
Okay.
Moment. I'm looking for my mute, but I guess is I know you're teaching at 2. Is it okay if I'm in here until like 1:50, 1:55?
150, I think.
1:50. Okay, thank you. Great. Okay, so everyone is picking up on the very resonant themes going on. And part of that discussion is in Purim, we're instructed to be joyous. And as Enid and Leslie both, picked up, this is not exactly a wholly joyous moment, especially when we put into our current context. So I just want to pick out the bold is pretty self-explanatory. The word joyous is repeated. And the italicized part in this beginning is a theme throughout that it's 127 provinces, each in their own script, administrative nightmare. This is not the first time this appears in the Book of Esther, and some scholars include this in a thesis of, picking up some of the humor and satire throughout. So I just want to point those two things out to you. And this instruction from the Talmud that we get, that when we enter the month that Purim is in, which is Adar, we increase in happiness. So I started to mention a little bit, what does it mean to be instructed to feel a certain type of way because of the Jewish calendar, when that may or may not resonate with our current moment. Any response? I guess I've got to keep it moving. Yes, Enid.
Well, this issue of joy is very interesting to me because in some of my studies, they talk about these ancient rabbis who lost children, terrible things happened to them, and still they were able to rise above it. Maybe because of their relationship with God or the commandments or whatever. So, and I have a magnet thing, I don't collect them, but I have one that says joy has no bounds. And so I always think about this because, well, for example, at the time of a death or at the time of a yortzeit, what do? You would say this prayer, this Yiska prayer, and it's extolling God.
Oh, unless it's this one.
Yeah, I mean, there's
Somebody in the background. So in a sense, there's something joyful, there's something elevating about being joyful and I'm not saying you shouldn't feel sad. They hold equal tensions. Okay, I'm not deleting one. Maybe you need to hold them together in each hand separately, but there's something to be said about not falling into the abyss. And then I always say the plot in Judaism is that you have to have a degree of joyfulness because you owe it to God to do your work on this earth to co-create. So they don't want you to end up being, in an abyss. I don't know. I think
there's sort of, I'll just
issue.
mention the Jewish calendar has some, it creates space and time for certain feelings. It's not to say you're not allowed to feel sad because of whatever's going on Purim, but it is an attempt to make some space for joy, and other holidays are to make space for sadness. But whatever, throughout the Jewish calendar, there are these suggested emotional states for us to participate in. And that's what we're there for. So we don't skip it over. It accounts for a holistic human and emotional experience. So I'm going to keep us moving because we got a couple more. Let's see. So this one. Yeah. Okay. So we're not going to read this whole excerpt, but one of the highlights of the Book of Esther is this moment before Esther confronts the king, is worried about the repercussions, consults with Mordecai, and I have it in bold right here. Mordecai advises her, and who knows, perhaps you have attained this royal position for this moment, for just such a crisis. I'm seeing a lot of nods. Do Enid or Deborah, do you want to expound on your nod at all?
This is one of the themes of the story that I've heard a lot, sorry. And her fear and his declaration that this could possibly be why she's in the castle to begin with, so that she could have this role for the Jewish people. I think it's cool. I think you never know what your role is going to be in life, and to embrace what we fought, is in front of you, not knowing why you are asked to do something. Oh, I like that theme.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a real highlight of the Book of Esther. And in this larger excerpt, it's not out of nowhere. She connects with her community. She fasts, leads a 3-day fast. She consults with Mordecai. She is the hero of our story, the heroine of our story, shows this resilience, overcoming these kind of, very apparent challenges. And the way she does it is through community relationships and her own courage. So that again is, joy was a larger kind of emotional discussion. Resilience is more straightforward, of another theme that we get in the Book of Esther in this diaspora story without an explicit mention of God. A human response very much is resilience. So I'm going to bring us to, this is towards the end of the Book of Esther. We get some, it's almost like if you're imagining, the Book of Esther is turned into a play, but this is kind of a breaking the fourth wall moment. So that I'll read it. That is why village Jews who live in unwalled towns observe the 14th day of the month of Adar and make it a day of merrymaking and feasting, and as a holiday and an occasion for sending gifts to one another. Mishloach manot. Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent dispatches to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Ahasuerus, near and far, changing them to observe the 14th and 15th days of Adar every year, the same days on which the Jews enjoyed relief from their foes, and the same month which had been transformed for them from one of grief and mourning to one of festive joy. They were to observe them as days of feasting and merrymaking, as an occasion for sending gifts to one another and presents to the poor. So this lays out how we observe Purim, the 4 mitzvot of Purim, which are hearing the Megillah, having a big meal, giving mishloach manot, which gifts to friends, and matanot le'evyonim, giving gifts to the poor, which, again, very much a Jewish theme. Even in times of celebration, we are also thinking about giving. We're also thinking about, life beyond ourselves, both in our community and those in need, and the overlap of such. I think it's noteworthy that in this celebration, we're also instructed to give. Any response to this? This instruction. This is again, at the very end, this is how you'll celebrate the holiday of Purim as it comes to take form. Yeah, Deborah.
One of the things I love about Judaism is the balance of things, because Purim you're supposed to celebrate in such a way that it's almost over the top with a lot of drinking. And especially if you go to a Chabad and Purim, and like the drinking is crazy. And then that's happening at the same time. You need to give your friends food and make sure the poor are taken care of. It's not just pure unbridled joy. You have to remember other people. And I like that part of Purim and almost every other holiday that we have, the balance of things.
Oh, you're on mute.
Yes, Leslie, go ahead.
Yeah, I just real quick, it kind of goes after you just talked about all the things that we must do about hearing the Megillah being read and eating a lot and giving to people. It takes me back to your first slide that talking about God kind of moves out of the picture, and this is all left to us. we need to do it. We need to be responsible. We need to pick up the ball. It's been given to us and we need to run with it. So it's our responsibility. We can't ask God to give it to us. We are not asking God, oh, forgive us, from some other holidays. I love what you said, Deb, about the balance. And so we, there are other times when there's harder work to be done, but this is, if we take on this responsibility, the gift is joy and passing it on and creating community. So that's it.
I love that. I love this, perspective of balance. Also, I apologize for the background noise and changing locations and
Okay.
Are you sitting in a closet?
I'm across from the elevators right now.
It's the most unique room I've ever been on.
You're in the dark, Rabbi.
Yes.
Found a
Yes.
quiet place.
So cool.
But yeah, I love what both of you are saying, and you're very much picking up on, how I was approaching this study of the Book of Esther and this Purim, both with the instruction to be joyful in a time that doesn't feel joyful, and a story of the diaspora in a time when Israel is taking up such a presence in the collective Jewish consciousness right now. So yeah, and those are three ways that we can respond within our power, without a divine miracle, without being in the land of Israel, very much within our power to be joyful and celebrate, to be resilient in the areas that we need it, and to think beyond ourselves and give to loved ones and those in need. So very much picking up on those ideas. Any last comments and reflections, something that stood out to you or something that you're taking with you from any of the things that we studied, the background information or these three themes? Yeah, Enid.
Well, I agree with everything that's been said and discussed in your summation. And I mean this for the good. I'm just wondering if it just so happened that Esther, I can't remember the sentence now, but the sentence about Esther was called to that job, right? However way it was written. So my way of seeing it could be that God is hiding in the backstage at the theater behind the curtain, directing the traffic, because why was that the only situation? And it just so happens that was, as Debbie said, her call to life. However, I don't want to intervene in an inappropriate way on the trend of this study.
Not inappropriate at all. I think you're picking up on, just because God's name isn't explicitly mentioned doesn't mean there isn't divine, happenings exactly going on. And that's another big theme. And yeah, as I think about it in our lives and context, I'm not expecting to encounter God in a burning bush anytime soon. But, through lived experience, relationships, holidays, joy, resilience, all these things, I still pursue connection with God, even if it's not as explicit as it might be in other parts of the Hebrew Bible. So not inappropriate at all, Enid and I. We all appreciate the comment. So I'll say thank you. I'm sorry that it's a little hectic over here and we're stopping a few minutes short. But I so appreciate your reflections and questions on the Book of Esther.
Maybe it's a Purim joke.
Maybe it's a Purim joke.
Maybe it's a short-term joke. It's a little haphazard, right?
That's true, yeah. Here we are, finishing class as people come out of the elevator to my right and left.
Well, thank you for multitasking, taking time out of your conference to
Yes, thank you
share
so
this
much, guys.
wisdom with us.
Thank you very much.
It's a real pleasure to be with you all, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.
Safe
Back home.
travels home.
Good week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Take care, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.